The official report stated that Lieutenant Commander Jacob Reynolds held off a battalion of mercenaries single-handedly. That was a lie. The truth is much more terrifying, and it was buried in a redacted file for 10 years. Reynolds was bleeding out on the floor, unable to lift his rifle. The person who saved him, the person who systematically dismantled 45 heavily armed insurgents in a chaotic hospital ward, wasn't a soldier. She was the woman changing his bedpan. She was the quiet, trembling nurse who apologized when she dropped a thermometer. Jacob Reynolds thought she was just a civilian. He was wrong. And by the time the sun came up, the entire hospital would know exactly how wrong he was. The air in the St. Jude's humanitarian outpost smelled of iodine-stale sweat and impending death. It was a smell Lieutenant Commander Jacob Reynolds knew intimately, usually right before things went from bad to catastrophic. Jacob lay in bed 4, his left leg elevated, packed with gauze that was already seeping a dark, ominous red. A botched extraction in the Sud Kivu province had left his team scattered, and him with a jagged piece of shrapnel lodged against his femoral artery. He was a Tier 1 operator, a man trained to endure torture and extreme environments, but right now he was reduced to a groan as the nurse tightened the dressing. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Reynolds," the nurse whispered, her voice trembling. She was a small woman, perhaps late 30s, with fraying brown hair pulled back in a messy bun and large, fearful hazel eyes behind thick glasses. Her name tag read, Seraphiel Miller, RN. Just do it, Seraphiel." Jacob gritted out his knuckles, white against the metal rails of the bed. She fumbled with the medical tape, dropping the roll. It clattered loudly on the concrete floor. She flinched as if a grenade had gone off. "Oh no, I'm clumsy today. I'm so sorry." Jacob watched her scramble to pick it up. She moved like a civilian, frantic, uncoordinated soft. She was the kind of person who belonged in a suburban clinic handing out lollipops, not in a demilitarized zone surrounded by warlords. "Hey," Jacob said, his voice raspy. "Relax, you're doing fine. Just get me patched up so I can find a radio." Seraphiel stood up, adjusting her glasses. "Dr. Orris said you aren't to move. The artery it's delicate. If you move too much, you'll bleed out in minutes." "If I stay here, we all bleed out," Jacob muttered, looking toward the window. The sun was setting, casting long, bloody shadows across the scrubland outside. He knew they were coming. The group that had ambushed his team, the Viper Vanguard, a private mercenary army, led by the notorious ex-Rhodesian tactician Silas Vane, didn't leave loose ends. "I'll get you some water," Seraphiel said softly, tucking the blanket around him, with a motherly tenderness that annoyed him. She was too nice for this world. "Please try to rest." She walked away, her shoes squeaking on the linoleum. Jacob watched her go, shaking his head. She was guarding the ICU ward, a room filled with 12 orphans and 3 critical post-op locals. If Silas Vane's men breached the perimeter, Seraphiel Miller wouldn't last 5 seconds. She would faint at the sight of a muzzle flash. Jacob reached under his pillow, his fingers brushing the cold steel of his Sig Sauer P226. It had 3 rounds left. He closed his eyes. 3 rounds, 45 enemies, and a nurse who's afraid of her own shadow. He had never felt so helpless in his life. Night fell like a hammer. The generator hummed outside, a rhythmic thumping that masked the sound of the approaching trucks, but it couldn't mask the vibration. Jacob felt it in the frame of his bed. Thrum, thrum, thrum. Heavy transport vehicles, at least 3 of them. Dr. Aris, the overworked Greek surgeon who ran the outpost, burst into the ward. He was wiping blood from his hands onto a rag. "Jacob, the sentries are gone. They aren't answering the radio." Jacob tried to sit up, but the world spun. The pain in his leg was a blinding white light. "It's vain," Jacob gasped. "He's found us. How many security guards do you have left?" "2," Eris said, his face pale. "And one is armed with a shotgun from the 1980s. Jacob, what do we do?" "Barricade the doors," Jacob ordered, fighting the nausea. "Move the heavy equipment against the main entrance. Turn off the lights. Get the kids on the floor." Seraphiel appeared from the supply closet, clutching a handful of saline bags. She looked terrified. Her hands were shaking so hard the bags rustled. "Seraphiel," Jacob barked. "Forget the IVs. Help Aris move the beds. We're about to be hit." "Hit?" she squeaked. "Like attacked." "Yes, attacked. Now move." She nodded frantically, rushing to help Doctor. Aris pushed a heavy metal cabinet in front of the double doors. She looked weak, struggling with the weight slipping on the floor. Jacob cursed his useless leg. He checked his pistol again. Chamber check. 1 in the pipe, 2 in the mag. Suddenly the generator cut out. The hospital plunged into suffocating darkness. The silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with violence. Then came the sound of breaking glass from the east wing. "They're inside," Jacob whispered. "Oh God." Seraphiel whimpered, crouching behind the nurse's station. She had her hands over her ears. "I can't do this. I can't do this." "You have to," Jacob hissed, leveling his pistol at the ward doors. "Stay down, Seraphiel. No matter what you hear, do not stand up." The sound of heavy boots echoed down the corridor. These weren't undisciplined rebels. These were professionals. They moved in silence, communicating with clicks and taps. Jacob counted the footsteps. 4, maybe 5 in the hallway, but outside dozens more were surrounding the building. A voice boomed from the darkness, thick with a jagged accent. It was Silas Vane's lieutenant, a man known as the Butcher. "We know the American is in there. Give him to us and we leave the children. Refuse and we burn this building to the ash." Dr. Orris looked at Jacob. The doctor was trembling. "Jacob." "They're lying," Jacob said. "They'll kill everyone to cover their tracks. Don't open that door." I have to go check the back exit," Dr. Orris whispered. "Maybe I can get the kids out." "No, Orris, wait." But the doctor panicked. He bolted for the rear emergency exit of the ward. Crack! A single suppressed shot punched through the rear window. Dr. Aris crumpled to the floor, a dark hole in his chest. Seraphiel screamed a high, piercing sound that cut through the tension. "Quiet!" Jacob roared, but it was too late. The main doors to the ward exploded inward. A breach charge. The heavy cabinet flew across the room like a toy. Smoke filled the air. Jacob raised his weapon, his vision blurring. He saw 3 silhouettes moving through the smoke, their laser sights cutting green lines through the dust. He fired. Bang! 1 target dropped. He fired again. Click! A misfire. A stovepipe jam. "No," Jacob whispered. He tried to clear it, but his blood-slicked hands fumbled. A mercenary stepped through the smoke, raising an AK-47 toward Jacob's bed. He was massive, wearing tactical gear worth more than the entire hospital. He grinned, his teeth white in the gloom. "End of the road, Yank." Jacob braced for the bullet. He saw the mercenary's finger tighten on the trigger. Then he saw Seraphiel. She wasn't hiding behind the desk anymore. She was standing up, and she wasn't trembling. The transformation happened in a fraction of a second. It was so subtle that if Jacob hadn't been looking directly at her, he would have missed it. One moment, Seraphiel Miller was a terrified nurse with slumped shoulders and fearful eyes. The next, her posture aligned. Her spine straightened. Her chin dipped slightly. The fear evaporated from her face, replaced by a cold, dead calm that was infinitely more terrifying than the mercenary's gun. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She took one step forward. In her right hand, she held a pair of heavy trauma shears. The mercenary, sensing movement, shifted his aim from Jacob to Seraphiel. "Sit down, bitch, or I—" He never finished the sentence. Seraphiel closed the distance with a burst of speed that defied physics. It wasn't the frantic run of a civilian. It was the explosive, controlled acceleration of a jungle cat. She dropped to her knees, sliding across the blood-slicked floor, slipping under the barrel of the AK-47. As she slid past him, her right hand lashed out. She didn't stab him randomly. She drove the closed blades of the trauma shears into the soft spot beneath the mercenary's jaw upward, into the brain stem, and ripped it back out in one fluid motion. The mercenary didn't even make a sound. He just folded his nervous system instantly severed. Jacob's jaw dropped. Seraphiel didn't stop. She caught the falling mercenary's body with her left hand to silence the impact of his gear hitting the floor while simultaneously catching his falling AK-47 with her right. Two more mercenaries rushed through the smoke, seeing their point man fall. Seraphiel didn't raise the rifle to her shoulder. She fired from the hip, 2 double taps. Pop, 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 pop. Controlled, precise. The bullets struck the mercenaries in the exposed gaps of their body armor, one in the throat, one in the ocular cavity. They dropped instantly. Silence returned to the ward, heavier than before. Jacob stared at her. His brain couldn't process the data. The woman standing amidst the bodies wasn't Seraphiel the nurse. She stood over the dead men, checking the corners of the room, with the rifle, her finger indexed along the receiver, her breathing rhythmic and slow. She reached up and pulled the glasses off her face, tossing them onto the floor. She didn't need them. They were a prop. She turned to Jacob. Her eyes were different now. The hazel wasn't soft. It was like hard amber. There was no empathy in them, only calculation. "Clear your malfunction, Lieutenant," she said. Her voice was different too. The tremble was gone. It was an octave lower, commanding and devoid of emotion. "You have a stovepipe. Rack it, now." Who are you?" Jacob stammered his hands, finally obeying her command to clear his weapon. "We have 42 hostiles remaining," she said, ignoring his question. She stripped the vest off the dead mercenary and began strapping it onto her scrub top. It looked absurd. Tactical black nylon over pink floral scrubs. But she wore it like a second skin. "They will realize this team is dead in approximately 60 seconds. Can you move? I can't walk." She knelt beside him, checking his bandages with professional efficiency, but without the gentleness she had shown earlier. "Then you are the turret. You cover the double doors. I'm going hunting." "Hunting?" Jacob asked, bewildered. "Seraphiel, there are 40 men out there. You can't go out there." She picked up a discarded combat knife from one of the bodies and sheathed it in her belt. She looked at the door where the darkness waited. "My name isn't Seraphiel," she said, checking the magazine of the AK-47. "And they are locked in here with me." She moved toward the shadows of the hallway, moving so silently, she didn't even disturb the dust. "Wait," Jacob hissed. "How do you know what to do?" She paused at the threshold, the red emergency light illuminating half her face. "I used to be the one they sent to kill people like Silas Vane," she said. "Now watch the corridor. Don't shoot me when I come back." She vanished into the dark. 10 seconds later, the screaming started. It wasn't Seraphiel screaming. It was the mercenaries. Jacob Reynolds dragged himself across the floor, gritting his teeth against the searing pain in his leg. He reached the dead mercenary, the one Seraphiel had gutted with the trauma shears, and fumbled for the man's radio. He needed intel. He needed to know what the hell was happening outside the double doors. He pressed the earpiece against his head, his hand slick with blood. The chatter on the channel was chaotic. Team 2, check in. Over. Static. Team 2, this is Vane. Report. They're gone, boss. Team 2 is gone. Gone? What do you mean gone? I found Miller. Throat slit. I found Davis. He's been nailed to the wall with a surgical bone drill. Jacob felt a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with blood loss. A surgical bone drill. Seraphiel wasn't just killing them. She was dismantling them with whatever was at hand. She was turning the hospital into a slaughterhouse. How many hostiles? Vane's voice crackled angry now. Is it a SEAL platoon? Negative, we haven't seen anyone. It's just... Shadows, boss. The lights are cut in the east wing. We hear movement, we fire, and then a scream cut across the radio frequency. It was a wet, gurgling sound that ended abruptly. Contact, contact. She's in the ceiling, she's... Click. Silence. Jacob stared at the closed doors of the ward. He looked at the orphans huddling under the beds, eyes wide with terror. It's okay, he lied, his voice raspy. The bad men are losing. Outside in the corridor, the war was shifting. Seraphiel moved through the darkened hospital like smoke. She had discarded her shoes. Her socked feet made no sound on the linoleum. She knew this building. She knew that the HVAC ducts in the ceiling were wide enough for a person. She knew that the oxygen storage room was adjacent to the main hallway. She wasn't fighting like a soldier. Soldiers fight for ground. She was fighting like an assassin. She fought for fear. She dropped from a vent behind a heavy gunner who was setting up a machine gun nest facing the ward. Before he could turn, she looped a length of IV tubing around his neck. It wasn't a fair fight. She tightened at her knee in his back, leveraging his body weight against him until he went limp. She took his grenades. She moved to the junction where 4 mercenaries were regrouping. They were nervous, sweeping their flashlights back and forth. The beams cut through the dust. "Come out!" one shouted, his voice cracking. "We know you're here." Seraphiel didn't come out. She rolled a cylinder of compressed oxygen down the hallway toward them. The mercenaries turned, seeing the metal tank rattling towards them. "Grenade!" one screamed, diving for cover. It wasn't a grenade, but as the tank rolled past them, Seraphiel, positioned 30 feet away in a linen closet, raised the stolen AK-47. She didn't aim for the men. She aimed for the valve of the tank. Crack. The bullet sheared the valve off. The tank exploded not with fire, but with sheer kinetic force. It turned into a missile, rocketing down the hallway, smashing into the mercenaries with bone-crushing velocity. The pressure wave blew out the windows. In the confusion, Seraphiel was among them. She didn't spray bullets. She used the rifle as a club, a spear, a shield. She moved with an economy of motion that was terrifying to behold. A stock strike to the temple, a muzzle punch to the solar plexus, a controlled shot to the head while the enemy was doubled over. 3 more down. She paused, listening. Her heart rate was barely elevated. She checked her magazine. 7 rounds left. She swapped it for a fresh one from a dead body. The radio on the dead man's chest crackled. "This is Vane. Pull back to the lobby. All units, pull back. We are burning the building down. I don't care about the American anymore. I want that bitch dead." Seraphiel pressed the transmit button on the dead man's rig. "Come and get me, Silas," she whispered into the mic. There was a long pause on the other end. "Who is this?" Vane demanded. "You remember Operation Red Sand?" Seraphiel asked, her voice devoid of humanity. "You remember the safe house in Benghazi? The one you burned with the families inside silence?" "Impossible," Vane whispered. "Agent K is dead. I saw the body." "You saw what I wanted you to see," Seraphiel replied. "Come to the ward, Silas. Let's finish it." She dropped the radio and turned back toward the ICU. She had bought them time, but now she had summoned the devil himself. Back in the ward, Jacob had managed to drag himself into a sitting position behind an overturned metal desk. He had the Sig Sauer aimed at the door. He had 2 rounds left. The door didn't open. It dissolved. An RPG struck the wall beside the doorframe, blowing a hole in the masonry and sending a shockwave that rattled Jacob's teeth. Dust and debris rained down on the children who screamed in unison. Through the hole stepped a giant. It wasn't Silas Vane. It was his enforcer, the man known only as the Butcher. He stood 6'5", wearing heavy ballistic armor that made him look like a tank. He carried a belt-fed PKM machine gun, as if it were a toy. Jacob fired. Bang! The bullet struck the Butcher's chest plate and sparked harmlessly. The armor was rated for rifle rounds. A 9mm pistol was like throwing a pebble. The Butcher laughed a deep, rumbling sound. He raised the machine gun. "Found you, little hero." Jacob squeezed the trigger again. Click. Empty. He looked at the Butcher. He looked at the machine gun barrel. He thought of his daughter back in Virginia, the one he hadn't seen in 6 months. "I'm sorry, kiddo." The Butcher's finger tightened on the trigger. Suddenly, the air vent above the Butcher's head gave way. Seraphil didn't drop down. She launched herself. She fell like a meteor, her boots slamming into the Butcher's shoulders, driving him to the ground under her weight. The machine gun clattered away, firing a burst into the ceiling. They hit the floor in a tangle of limbs. The Butcher was strong, superhumanly strong. He roared, throwing Seraphil off him as if she were a doll. She hit the wall hard, the breath driven from her lungs. She was up instantly. She had lost her rifle in the fall. She had only the knife. The Butcher scrambled up, drawing a massive trench knife from his belt. "I'm going to peel you," he growled. Seraphil didn't speak. She adopted a fighting stance that Jacob recognized instantly. It wasn't military basic. It wasn't MMA. It was Silat, a brutal Southeast Asian martial art, focused on quick, devastating strikes and blade work. The Butcher lunged. Seraphil sidestepped, moving inside his guard. She slashed his forearm, severing the tendons. The Butcher howled, dropping his knife, but he swung a massive backhand that caught Seraphil in the ribs. Jacob heard the crack of bone from across the room. Seraphil flew backward, crashing into a cart of medical instruments. She coughed, spitting blood. She was hurt. Badly. "Seraphil!" Jacob yelled, trying to crawl toward his dropped pistol. The Butcher charged her, lowering his shoulder to crush her against the wall. Seraphil didn't try to dodge this time. She waited. 1 second, half a second. As the Butcher collided with her, she dropped to her back, planting her feet on his stomach in a Tomoe Nage sacrifice throw. Using his own momentum against him, she launched the 300-pound man over her head. He flew through the air, crashing into the heavy glass of the medicine cabinet. He tried to rise, groggy glass shards embedded in his face. Seraphil was already moving. She didn't use her knife. She grabbed a defibrillator paddle from the crash cart. She didn't charge it. She grabbed the cord, wrapped it around the Butcher's thick neck and pulled. He thrashed. He clawed at the wire. He slammed her against the cabinets, trying to break her grip. Seraphil's face was a mask of grim determination. Blood poured from a cut on her forehead, blinding her left eye. She didn't let go. She tightened the garrote, her muscles screaming, her veins popping. "Die," she whispered. The Butcher's eyes bulged. His struggles grew weaker. His hands flopped to his sides. Then finally he stopped moving. Seraphil held the choke for another full 10 seconds, ensuring he was gone. Then she released the cord. The giant body slumped to the floor with a heavy thud. Seraphil collapsed against the wall, sliding down, until she was sitting on the floor. Her pink scrubs were now red. Her glasses were gone. Her hands were bruised and bloody. Jacob stared at her. The room was silent except for the weeping of the children. "You," Jacob rasped. "You just choked out a man twice your size." Seraphiel wiped the blood from her eyes. She looked at her trembling hands. The adrenaline was fading, and the pain was setting in. "He was slow," she murmured. "Too much muscle. Limited range of motion." "Seraphiel," Jacob said, his voice firm. "Who are you?" She looked up at him. The nurse was gone completely. "My name is Clara Vance," she said quietly. "I was an operative for the Special Activities Center, the unit that doesn't exist." The silence in the ward was heavy. Outside, the shooting had stopped, but the sound of heavy engines revving indicated Vane was preparing for a final assault. Jacob dragged himself over to where Seraphiel Clara was sitting. She was expertly packing a deep gash in her arm with gauze wincing but not making a sound. "The Special Activities Center," Jacob repeated. "CIA ground branch. I thought you guys were myths, or psychopaths." "A bit of both," she said, biting the tape to tear it. "I worked the dark files. Assassinations, destabilization, deep cover. Operation Red Sand. That was me. We were supposed to take down a warlord. The intel was bad. Vane was the security consultant. He sold us out. My whole team died. And you, I survived. I tracked Vane for 2 years. I killed his partners. I dismantled his network. But I lost myself." She looked at the children hiding under the beds. Her expression softened the first crack in her armor since the fighting started. "I became a monster to catch a monster. Collateral damage became a statistic. One day I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the human being looking back." "So you ran," Jacob said. "I retired. I died on paper. I came here to the middle of nowhere to try and save lives instead of taking them. I wanted to balance the ledger." She laughed bitterly. "I thought if I saved enough people, maybe the ghosts would stop screaming." "You saved me," Jacob said. "You saved these kids." "It's not enough," she whispered. "It's never enough." She stood up, groaning, as her broken ribs shifted. She picked up the butcher's PKM machine gun. It was heavy, but she hoisted it onto the windowsill, propping it up on a stack of blankets. "What are you doing?" Jacob asked. "Vane is out there. He knows I'm here now. He won't leave. He has a Technicolor truck with a mounted .50 caliber gun. If he starts firing that into the building, the walls won't hold." She checked the belt on the machine gun. "I'm going to draw his fire," she said. "That's suicide," Jacob said. "It's a distraction," she corrected. "I need you to take the kids. There's a drainage tunnel in the basement laundry room. It leads out to the riverbed. It's tight, but the kids will fit. You can drag yourself." "And leave you here." Jacob shook his head. "No, we fight together." "You have one leg, Jacob. You can't fight this." She looked at him, and for a second the hazel eyes were warm again. "Get them out, please. Let me do the one thing I'm good at." Jacob looked at the kids. He knew she was right. If they stayed, they died. "Make sure you follow us," Jacob said. She didn't answer. She just racked the bolt of the machine gun. "Go," she commanded. Jacob began herding the children toward the back service stairs. As he reached the door, he looked back. Seraphiel stood framed by the moonlight, a small woman with a massive gun standing against an army. "Clara," he called out. She looked back. "Give him hell." She smiled a genuine wolfish smile. "I intend to." Outside, a loudspeaker crackled. "Clara, come out. We have the building surrounded. There is no escape." Seraphiel leaned into the stock of the machine gun. She took a deep breath, slowing her heart rate, centering her mind. "I'm not trapped in here with you, Silas," she whispered to herself. She kicked the window frame out. "You're trapped in here with me!" She screamed and pulled the trigger. The machine gun roared, spitting a tongue of flame into the night. The PKM machine gun clicked dry. The heavy barrel was glowing cherry red in the dark, smoking like a dying cigar. Seraphil Clora didn't panic. She dropped the useless weapon and rolled away from the window, just as a heavy point, .50 caliber round punched through the cinderblock wall, disintegrating the exact spot where her head had been a second ago. Dust choked the air. The hospital was dissolving around her. The ceiling tiles rained down like confetti. "Jacob better be clear," she muttered, wiping blood from her eyes. She checked her pockets. She had one magazine left for the stolen pistol, a combat knife with a chipped blade, and a flare gun she had found in the emergency kit. Not enough to kill an army, but maybe enough to kill a king. "Breach!" A voice screamed from the hallway. The wall to the left of the nurse's station imploded. A heavy armored truck the technical had driven straight through the lobby and into the main ward. Its headlights blinded her. The mounted gun on top swiveled, searching for targets. Seraphil didn't run. She scrambled toward the truck, staying below the hood line. The gunner couldn't depress the barrel low enough. He shouted something in Russian, but Seraphil was already there. She jammed the flare gun through the driver's side shattered window and pulled the trigger. The flare exploded inside the cab, a blinding magnesium sun. The driver screamed, thrashing, as his uniform caught fire. The truck swerved, slamming into a structural pillar. The impact threw the gunner from his perch. Seraphil moved past the wreckage, limping heavily. Her ribs were definitely broken. Every breath felt like inhaling broken glass. She was heading for the only place left to go, the operating room. It was a dead end. But it was also a kill box. She stumbled through the double doors of the OR, her hand trailing along the wall to keep herself upright. She flipped the main breaker, plunging the room into total darkness. Then she hid. Not under a table, but inside a supply cabinet, leaving the door cracked just an inch. She waited. Silence stretched. Then footsteps. Slow, deliberate, expensive leather boots on tile. "Clora." Silas Vane's voice echoed in the tiled room. It was smooth-cultured and utterly sociopathic. "You've caused me a great deal of expense tonight." He stepped into the room. He wasn't wearing armor. He wore a bespoke tactical suit, holding a suppressed MP5 in one hand and a thermal imaging monocle in the other. He scanned the room. The thermal heat signatures of the recently used equipment were fading, but Seraphil knew her body heat would give her away in seconds. "I know you're hurt," Vane said, walking toward the operating table. "I saw the blood trail. You were good once, Clora. The best I ever trained. But you went soft. You developed a conscience." He turned, raising the weapon toward the supply cabinet. He had seen her heat signature. "Found you." He fired. Thwip, thwip, thwip. The bullets shredded the metal cabinet door, but Seraphil wasn't in the cabinet anymore. She had stripped off her thermal retaining vest and propped it up inside the cabinet to create a ghost signature. She was currently pressed against the ceiling, straddling the heavy surgical lights above Vane's head. She let go. She fell silently, landing directly on Vane's shoulders. The impact drove him to the floor, knocking the MP5 from his grip. They rolled a tangle of limbs and fury. Vane was faster than the butcher. He elbowed her in the broken ribs, a precise strike that made her vision white out. Seraphil gasped, losing her grip. Vane spun, backhanding her across the face. She slid across the floor, crashing into the instrument tray. Scalpels and forceps scattered everywhere. Vane stood up, adjusting his cuffs. He pulled a long, serrated knife from his belt. "You should have stayed dead, Agent Vance," he sneered, walking toward her. Seraphil scrambled backward, her hand closing around a fallen scalpel. It was tiny compared to his knife. "You burned them," Seraphil wheezed, spitting blood. "The family's in Benghazi. You locked the doors." "Business," Vane shrugged. "Clean lines, no witnesses, just like tonight." He lunged. Seraphil parried the scalpel sparking against his heavy knife. He was stronger, fresher. He drove her back, slashing her arm, then her thigh. She was bleeding out. Her movements were slowing. Vane kicked her hand, sending the scalpel flying. He grabbed her by the throat and lifted her off the ground, pinning her against the wall. "Any last words?" Vane asked, the tip of his knife pressing against her heart. Seraphil looked him in the eye. Her vision was tunneling. She smiled, her teeth red. "Just 2, she whispered. She reached into her scrub pocket with her free hand. "Look down." Vane frowned. He looked down. Seraphil was holding a detonator. The wire ran from her pocket to the main oxygen line valve she had rigged behind the wall panel earlier. "Checkmate," she whispered. She pressed the button. The explosion wasn't fiery. It was a pressurized rupture of pure oxygen, meeting a spark from the severed electrical box. The wall behind Vane exploded outward. The blast threw them both across the room. Vane hit the far wall with a sickening crunch. Seraphil was thrown through the open doors into the hallway, shielding her head as debris rained down. She lay there, ears ringing, unable to move. Through the dust, she saw Vane trying to crawl. He was broken, his legs useless, dragging himself toward his gun. Seraphil tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't work. She crawled inch by inch toward the pistol Vane had dropped. Vane reached his gun first. He rolled over, raising it, his face a mask of hate. "Die!" he screamed. Boom! A single shot rang out. Vane's head snapped back. The gun fell from his hand. He slumped to the floor, dead. Seraphil blinked, confused. She hadn't fired. She didn't have a gun. She turned her head slowly toward the end of the hallway. Standing there, propped up on a crutch made from a broom handle, was Jacob Reynolds. He was holding a massive revolver he had taken from a dead mercenary. He was shaking pale and covered in mud from the tunnel, but his aim was true. "I told you," Jacob rasped, lowering the gun. "We fight together." Seraphil let her head drop to the floor. She closed her eyes. "You stubborn son of a—" Then the darkness took her. The dust in the hallway of St. Jude's humanitarian outpost didn't settle for hours. It hung in the air, a thick, choking fog of pulverized drywall, atomized concrete, and the copper tang of blood. Jacob Reynolds lay propped against the shattered remnants of the nurse's station. His leg was a ruin of agony, the tourniquet biting into his thigh with a pressure that felt like it was severing the bone. But he didn't look at his leg. He didn't look at the orphans huddled in the drainage tunnel, access weeping softly. He looked at the body of Silas Vane, the warlord who had terrorized a continent, now lying twisted and broken amidst the debris. And he looked past him to the woman slumped against the far wall. Clara Vance, the nurse, the killer, the savior. She wasn't moving. "Clara," Jacob croaked. His throat was full of grit. He tried to crawl toward her, dragging his useless leg, but his body finally rebelled. The adrenaline that had sustained him through the firefight evaporated, leaving behind a cold, paralyzing shock. He heard the sound of rotors. Not the rhythmic thump-thump of a medevac Huey, but the high-pitched whine of advanced turbines. "Friendly," Jacob whispered to the empty room. The double doors at the end of the ward were kicked open. Beams of blinding white light cut through the dust. Lasers danced across Jacob's chest. "Weapons down, hands. Show me your hands." The voices were American, but they weren't army. They were crisp, sterile, and professional. Jacob dropped the revolver. "Friendly U.S. Navy I have wounded." 4 figures moved into the room. They moved with the same fluid, predatory grace that Clara had shown. They wore unmarked grey tactical gear, no flags, no unit patches. Their faces were obscured by ballistic mandibles and black visors. One of them moved to Jacob, kicking the revolver away and checking his pupils with a penlight. Subject 1 is secure, vitals stable. "Forget me," Jacob slurred, grabbing the operator's vest. "Check her. The nurse. She's one of you." The operator didn't look at Clara. He looked at his team leader. "Secure the package," the leader commanded. Two of the grey-clad men moved past Jacob. They didn't go to the children. They went straight to Clara. Jacob watched through fading vision as they checked her pulse. One of them tapped his headset. "Status green. She's viable. Barely. Prep for immediate extract." "Hey!" Jacob yelled, or tried to, but it came out as a wheeze. "She needs a hospital. Get the medic. We are the hospital," the operator above him said coldly. He pulled a syringe from a pouch and jabbed it into Jacob's neck. "Sleep, Commander." The world tilted on its axis. The last thing Jacob saw before the darkness swallowed him was the grey team lifting Clara's limp body onto a specialized stretcher, covering her face with a silver thermal blanket, and carrying her out into the night like a piece of sensitive equipment. They didn't look back. 72 hours later, Ramstein Air Base, Germany. Jacob woke up in a room that was too white. The sheets were stiff, the air smelled of bleach and lemon antiseptic, and the hum of machinery was constant. He sat up, gasping, his hand flying to his leg. It was still there, heavily bandaged and elevated. "Easy, Commander. You're safe." Jacob turned. Sitting in the corner of the room was a man in a charcoal suit. He was reading a file on a tablet. He looked like every bureaucrat Jacob had ever met, bland, forgettable, and dangerous. "Where is she?" Jacob asked, his voice rasping. The man in the suit didn't look up. "Where is who?" "The nurse. Seraphiel. Clara. Whatever her name was." The man finally looked at him. He closed the tablet cover with a soft snap. "Commander Reynolds, you suffered significant blood loss and a concussion from the explosion. The mind often fabricates helpers in high-stress trauma scenarios to cope with the hopelessness of the situation." Jacob stared at him. The anger started in his chest, hot and sharp. "Don't gaslight me. I watched her take down 40 men. I watched her rig an oxygen line to blow a warlord through a wall. I saw your goon squad carry her out." The man stood up and walked to the foot of the bed. "The official report, which you will sign, states that a gas main explosion destroyed the St. Jude's Clinic. The hostile force identified as a local militia was neutralized by the blast and your defensive actions. You are a hero, Jacob. You saved 12 orphans." "I didn't save anyone," Jacob spat. "She did." "There was no woman, Jacob," the man said softly. His eyes were dead. Seraphiel Miller died in a car accident in Ohio in 2019. Clara Vance. Well, that individual doesn't exist in any database you have access to. If she did exist, she would be a ghost, and ghosts don't leave footprints. "I saw her," Jacob insisted, gripping the bed rails. "I have her patch. I have—" He reached for the bedside table where his personal effects should be. It was empty. His uniform was gone. His gear was gone. Even the morale patch Seraphiel had cut from his sleeve to bind his wound, the physical proof of her existence, was gone. "Your effects were contaminated," the man said smoothly. "Incinerated for safety." Jacob sank back into the pillows. He understood now. This wasn't a debriefing. It was an erasure. "Why?" Jacob asked. "Why hide her? She's a hero. She is a weapon commander, and weapons belong in the armory until they are needed." The man walked to the door. He paused, his hand on the handle. "Go home to your daughter, Jacob. Be a father. Forget about the angels and the demons. Let them fight in the dark. The door clicked shut. 5 months later. Arlington, Virginia. Retirement didn't suit Jacob Reynolds. He had been awarded the Navy Cross for his actions at St. Jude's. The ceremony was small, classified. The citation read, "For extraordinary heroism in the face of overwhelming odds." It didn't mention the nurse who had cleared the hallway. It didn't mention the woman who had sacrificed her body to save him. His leg had healed mostly. He walked with a cane, now a polished piece of hickory that he hated. It was a constant reminder of the night he had been helpless. Jacob spent his days in the archives. He used his remaining clearance, and when that hit a wall, he used old friends in naval intelligence who owed him favors. He became obsessed. He needed to know that he wasn't crazy. He needed to know that the woman with the hazel eyes and the deadly hands was real. He found fragments. A redacted after-action report from Benghazi in 2014 mentioning an asset Vi, a blurred photograph from a surveillance camera in Damascus showing a woman with messy brown hair walking away from a building moments before it exploded. He found a death certificate for a Clara Vance, dated 4 years ago. Cause of death training accident. It's a lie, Jacob muttered to himself, sitting in his small apartment, surrounded by papers. It's all a lie. His phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Reynolds," he answered. "Stop digging, Jacob." The voice was synthesized, distorted. "Who is this?" "You're tripping alarms, Jacob. The people who erased her. They don't like it when people go looking for the eraser. If you keep pulling this thread, you're going to strangle yourself." "Is she alive?" Jacob asked. "Just tell me that." Silence on the line. Then, "The diner on 4th and Main. Tuesday, 0800, order the cherry pie." The line went dead. Tuesday morning was grey and miserable. Rain lashed against the windows of Molly's diner, a greasy spoon that smelled of bacon grease and stale coffee. It was the kind of place where nobody looked at anybody else. Jacob sat in a booth at the back, facing the door. Old habits died hard. The cane leaned against the table. He checked his watch. 0805. Nothing. The diner was quiet. A trucker eating eggs at the counter. A young couple arguing in hushed tones. An old man reading a newspaper. Jacob felt foolish. It was a setup, or a prank. "More coffee, hon." Jacob looked up. The waitress was a woman in her 50s, tired-looking with frizzy grey hair and a stained apron. Her name tag read Barb. "Yeah," Jacob said. "And a slice of cherry pie." Barb paused. She looked at Jacob over the rim of her glasses. Her expression shifted, just for a fraction of a second, from bored service worker to something sharper. "Cherry pie," she repeated. "We don't sell a lot of that." "I was told it's good," Jacob said, holding her gaze. She didn't say anything. She poured the coffee, her hand steady. Then she walked back to the kitchen. Jacob waited. 10 minutes passed. He was about to leave anger rising in his gut again. He had been played. Barb returned. She was carrying a plate with a slice of pie and a small brown paper parcel. She set the pie down. Then she slid the parcel across the table under the napkin dispenser. "On the house," she said quietly. "Who sent this?" Jacob demanded, grabbing her wrist gently. Barb didn't flinch. She looked down at his hand, then up at his eyes. "I don't know names, sweetie. I just know that sometimes people leave things for people, and sometimes it's best not to ask who came in through the back door." She pulled her hand away and walked off to refill the trucker's mug. Jacob stared at the parcel. It was heavy. He looked around the diner. No one was watching him. The rain blurred the world outside. He unwrapped the paper. Inside was a small black leather notebook. A moleskin. It was battered, the corners worn white. Jacob opened it. The first page was a list of names. Silas Vane, the butcher, Anton Volkov. There were dozens of them. Warlords, arms dealers, human traffickers, monsters who operated in the cracks of the world where the law couldn't reach. Every name was crossed out in red ink. Jacob flipped through the pages. It was a ledger, an accounting of death, dates, locations, and confirmed kills. It was a diary of a crusade. He reached the last written page. The ink was fresh. Target, the architects of St. Jude's. Status pending. And below that, a note written in that same precise angular handwriting he had seen on a medical chart once. Jacob, they tried to put me in a cage. They tried to make me a trainer. They forgot that you can't domesticate a wolf just because you feed it. I'm out. I'm off the leash, and I have work to do. The agency thinks I'm dead. Let them believe it. It's easier to hunt when the prey thinks you're a ghost. Don't look for me. You won't find me. But if you ever find yourself in a corner again, if you ever find yourself outgunned and out of time, just look for the exit. I kept this for you. Jacob frowned. He turned the page. Taped to the back cover was a Velcro patch. It was scorched, stained with brown dried blood, and frayed at the edges. It was his Navy SEAL trident patch, the one she had cut off him. Jacob ran his thumb over the rough embroidery. A lump formed in his throat, hard and painful. She wasn't just alive. She was free. The cleaners hadn't erased her. She had escaped them. Or maybe she had terrified them into letting her go. Jacob looked out the window. Across the street, standing under the awning of a hardware store, was a figure. It was raining hard, and the figure was wearing a heavy grey raincoat with the hood up. He couldn't see the face. He couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. But the figure was looking right at him. Jacob raised his coffee cup slightly. A small, almost imperceptible salute. The figure in the raincoat stood still for a heartbeat. Then they raised a hand to their brow. A salute back. A bus roared past, blocking Jacob's view for 3 seconds. When the bus cleared, the sidewalk was empty. Jacob Reynolds let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for 6 months. He looked at the cane, leaning against the table. He picked up the notebook and slid it into his jacket pocket. Then he picked up the patch and pressed it firmly onto the Velcro strip of his jacket sleeve. He stood up. He left a $20 bill on the table for the pie he hadn't touched. He picked up his cane, tested his weight on his bad leg, and found that it didn't hurt quite as much as it did yesterday. "You missed a spot, Barb," he called out to the waitress. "What's that?" she yelled back from the kitchen. "The coffee." Jacob smiled, a genuine, dangerous smile returning to his face. It was perfect. He walked out into the rain. The world was still full of monsters. But now he knew, with absolute certainty, that there was something in the dark hunting them back. And that is the incredible untold story of the nurse of St. Jude's. The official records still list Clara Vance as a casualty of war, a convenient lie to cover up the existence of one of the deadliest operators to ever walk the earth. But Jacob Reynolds knows the truth. Somewhere out there is a guardian angel watching over the helpless. She doesn't carry a harp. She carries a scarred conscience and a very particular set of skills. It makes you wonder, the quiet person you see every day, the barista, the janitor, the nurse. What kind of wars have they fought in secret? What are they capable of if pushed too far? If you enjoyed this story, please smash that. Like button, it really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more gritty, realistic combat stories. Like this one. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you never miss an upload. And tell me in the comments, if you were Jacob, would you have gone back into that hospital? Let's talk about it down below. Thanks for watching, and stay safe out there.